increase awarded as part of this year's state wage case, the Minister's recommended an increase in line with the general increase awarded by the Fair Work Commission in the annual wage review. There are several reasons for that, one being that if the state minimum wage is realigned as recommended by the Minister, then having restored some parity between the amounts payable to the lowest paid in both jurisdictions, it would then be undesirable for state system employees to receive a general increase that's significantly lower than what's afforded to the national system employees, which could potentially undermine some of the benefits that would otherwise flow from a realignment. And also awarding an increase in line with the Fair Work Commission's decision would also ensure that rates of pay in state awards, particularly those above the C13 level, wouldn't fall significantly behind those in the national system. Just in terms of the economy and labour market, the Minister notes the West Australian economy and labour market has continued to display considerable resilience to date, with historically low levels of unemployment, a rapidly growing population and record employment. As demonstrated in much of the data presented by Mr Christmas this morning, most economic and labour market indices remain above pre-pandemic levels, and the state's domestic economy has been particularly buoyant to date. However, the domestic economy is expected to slow in the next financial year, in part to an easing in household consumption as consumers pull back on non-essential purchases. And that was borne out by the fall in discretionary spending over the last year that you could see. The Minister acknowledges that cost of living pressures have been challenging for many households, in particular employee households, which are far more likely to have mortgage and loan repayments to service. The Minister notes that elevated inflation is an impost for both households and business, and that's why the state and federal governments have included a range of initiatives to help ease the financial burden. In the state budget, this included a $400 electricity credit for all West Australian households and a $650 power bill credit for small business, and a range of other support measures as well for those most in need. The Minister acknowledges these initiatives are a vitally important part of the recent state and federal budgets and are designed to cushion some of the cost pressures businesses and households are facing. However, though very important, the budget measures cannot be seen as a substitute for regular and fair increases to minimum and award wages, which still remain a critical element of the wage-setting framework. In regard to wages, the Minister notes that wages growth has continued to pick up over the last year, with the wage price index recently displaying its strongest rate of growth for a number of years, particularly in the December quarter of 2023. However, as noted by Mr Christmas this morning, wages growth has since eased in the March quarter, and it has eased in a number of other measures as well in recent months, and it's projected to ease a bit further in the years ahead, so it probably has peaked. The Minister welcomes a return to real wages growth for the first time in around 3 years, although this follows a significant period of real wage reductions, including reductions for workers being paid the state minimum wage and state award wages. The Minister notes that the most recent seasonally adjusted estimate for average weekly ordinary time earnings in Western Australia is $2,107.70, or just under $110,000 per annum. By contrast, the full-time median earnings in Western Australia were $1,700 per week. That was in August 2023, and that's approximately $88,700 per annum. That's for full-time workers. At the same time, the state minimum wage is currently a little over $45,000 per annum. And the C10 classification, that is the skilled tradesperson's classification, is a little over $51,000 per annum. As also outlined in the Minister's primary submission, the most recent data indicates that award-reliant employees in Western Australia have much lower average earnings than those employed on collective agreements and individual arrangements, And they actually have lower average earnings than for award-reliant employees nationally as well. And some of that may reflect the higher Gini coefficient that exists in Western Australia. Minimum and award wage earners are one of the most vulnerable cohorts of workers and often have little in reserve to meet unexpected expenses for emergencies. It's therefore important that their wages be adjusted by an appropriate amount as part of the state wage case. The Minister's recommended realignment of the state minimum wage would significantly improve the financial well-being of the lowest paid, noting that the overall cost impact for business would be contained as the vast majority of state system employees receive rates of pay above the C13 level. The Minister submits that any increase awarded in this year's state wage case proceedings should take effect from the first pay period on or after 1 July 2024, in line with normal conventions. I'll just touch on apprenticeships and traineeships a little bit. The Minister's written submission included details on apprenticeship and traineeship commencements and numbers in training. The information analysis regarding training arrangements was provided by the Department of Training and Workforce Development, and the Minister thanks the Department for providing that information. As outlined in the Minister's submission, apprenticeship and traineeship commencements declined in 2023 following a significant increase in the previous 2 years as a result of the Commonwealth Government's investment in wage subsidy incentives. The reduction of Commonwealth incentives in July 2022 saw commencements drop, particularly for traineeships, affecting the overall numbers in training. However, apprenticeship and traineeship commencements in 2023 still remain more than 30% higher than the pre-pandemic levels. The total number of West Australians presently engaged in training also declined by around 3,000 persons in 2023. However, this was due to a fall in the number of people engaged in traineeships. The total number of people undertaking apprenticeships still actually increased for the 6th year in a row, and that's encouraging. With skill shortages still evident in a range of sectors, particularly in the construction trades and in community and personal services, it's vitally important that training wages continue to be fairly adjusted as part of the state wage order to facilitate the take-up of vocational education and training opportunities. An updated schedule of registered training packages and industry skill levels was appended to the Minister's primary submission.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Another issue that's relevant for this year's proceedings is the work value principle. The proposed amendments to Principle 7, which Unions WA are seeking, seek to modernise some of the language in the principle, including making it more consistent with the provisions relating to assessment of work value in the Fair Work Act. The Minister supports the Unions WA's proposed changes to Principle 7, which actually incorporates some additional wording that was recommended by the Minister to safeguard some of the key tenets of the principle. The Minister thanks Unions WA for collaborating on this issue and for considering the Minister's suggestions. The Minister believes the revised form of words, as supplied in Unions WA's written submission, achieves a modernisation of some of the language contained within the principle without substantively altering how it's intended to operate in practice. In relation to the submissions of the CCI regarding the potential changes to Principle 7, it's noted that Principle 7 is focused on work value rather than equal remuneration. The Minister does note that the CCI's proposed additional wording for Principle 7 would result in the principle setting a higher bar for employees working in the community sector and associated roles that are government funded, which could effectively mean the principle doesn't apply equally across all industries and occupations. As such, the Minister does not support the additional wording as put forward.
Does the Minister in effect support Unions WA's proposal?
Yes, it does, yes. The wording put forward by Unions WA incorporates the Minister's suggestions, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Before closing, I'd just touch briefly on the submissions of the other parties. With regard to the CCI's submission in reply, paragraph 4, the CCI suggests that the Minister's position fails to adequately consider the impact of the proposed wage increase on inflation. Just in regard to that issue, the Minister notes that the proposed realignment of the state minimum wage from the C14 rate to the C13 rate affects a very small subset of employees covered by the state system. It's actually a very low percentage that actually earn less than that. And in turn, only a minority of employees are covered by the private only a very small minority of employees in the private sector are covered by the state system. We've often worked off a general rule of thumb of somewhere between 15 to 20% of the private sector, although getting figures on that is quite difficult. Obviously, the state government and local government are also participants. So it's a subset of a subset. And the Minister respectfully suggests the number of affected employees is simply not large enough for it to have any discernible impact on inflation. The Minister also notes the decision of the Fair Work Commission to realign the national minimum wage from C14 to C13 and to make the C14 rate transitional in national modern awards hasn't been inflationary to date, despite the fact the national system covers millions of employees across all states and territories. In regards to the needs of the low pay, the CCI contended that any proposal to realign with the annual wage review was fundamentally flawed, as it disregards key economic differences such as the lower rate of CPI in Perth and the agency people have in Perth, Western Australia, to seek alternative and higher paying positions. In regard to these issues, the Minister notes the CPI in Perth and Australia are very similar, and in fact the true rate of inflation is higher in Perth if you take out the electricity subcomponent. Noting that some of the WA government's electricity credits would have kicked in during the March quarter 2024, which is why the headline rate was 0.6, but in removing electricity was 1%, quite a difference. The Minister also notes that many minimum and award wage workers can't just seek alternative and higher paying positions. Many of them are students, young people, people with caring responsibilities, migrants, and they have limitations on their ability to advance to more senior roles, or they might be people who are beginning their careers. We'd also just like to clarify a point with regard to the Minister's position in the annual wage review. In Table 1 and Table 2 of its reply submission, the CCI provides a breakdown of the quantum changes resulting from various proposals presented to the annual wage review and suggests the Minister submitted a claim to the Fair Work Commission for a 3.6% increase in wages.
I don't think a figure was nominated.
That's correct. A figure wasn't nominated, yes. So we're unaware of where that figure comes from. We'd also note that the extrapolation from those tables that the Minister's position in the state wage case could therefore result in a total increase of $124.39 per week seems to defy logic and doesn't make a lot of sense. In regards to the C14 rate, we note that the CCI states that it holds that the Minister's proposed realignment to C13 is unnecessary, as many awards treat C14 as a permanent classification, which is different to the national system. The Minister submits that this actually strengthens the argument for a realignment rather than diminishing it. If the rationale of the Fair Work Commission, which the Minister concurs with, is that the C14 rate does not constitute a proper minimum wage safety net for employees in ongoing employment, then it stands to reason that the fact many state awards treat C14 as an ongoing rate means these awards are more in need of a realignment rather than less. So we believe that actually strengthens the Minister's position on that issue. In regards to Unions WA, the Minister notes that Unions WA also supports a realignment of the state minimum wage from C14 to C13. The Minister welcomes the support for this proposition, although it's noted the Minister is not specifically seeking a 9.83% increase to the state minimum wage, and it's only asking for a general increase in line with the decision in the annual wage review. And as noted earlier, the Minister also agrees with Unions WA that the federal government's stage 3 tax cuts and other state and federal budget initiatives should not reduce the level of any increase awarded in this year's state wage case. Those initiatives, by their design, are intended to operate in tandem with regular wage increases to achieve their full effects. So their benefits would not be realised if wage rises were discounted because of them, effectively. Just before I finish, in regards to the WACOS submission, as with Unions WA, WACOS proposes a 7.359% increase in the state minimum wage, albeit it hasn't specifically nominated a particular increase for other award wages. The Minister would like to acknowledge the detailed information provided by WACOS regarding living costs, inequality and poverty, including issues concerning access to affordable housing, food, utilities, transport and childcare amongst marginalised members of the community. The WACOS submission provides some valuable background information for the Commission's consideration of the Section 50A criteria. The Minister also notes that the West Australian Local Government Association, or WALGA, supports a wage increase that balances the need for fair wages with the requirement for local governments to carefully manage their budgets in the interests of their communities. The Minister notes the information provided by WALGA regarding local government finances and the capacity of local government authorities to pay higher wages. This information is a relevant consideration for the state wage case, as is the need for local government workers reliant on minimum and award wages to receive a fair increase as part of this year's proceedings. In conclusion, the annual state wage proceedings are an important component of the state industrial relations system. The Minister notes that many low-paid employees are dependent on annual increases to minimum and award wages to help meet everyday living costs and alleviate the risk of financial hardship. Despite the relevantly buoyant economic conditions, West Australian households have been feeling the squeeze following a significant rise in the price of essential goods and services and a sustained period of declining real wages. As has been outlined in this submission, the Minister believes it's undesirable from a fairness and sustainability perspective for the minimum benchmark in the state system to be set at a rate significantly below that in the national system, and therefore supports the Commission realigning the state minimum wage from the C14 rate in the metal trades general award to the C13 rate. To maintain a degree of equity and fairness for state system employees, the Minister also supports a general increase in state award wages in line with the decision of the Fair Work Commission. This will ensure the realignment process is fully realised and that the state award wages maintain competitiveness with those in the national system. The Minister has no further substantive information for these proceedings, but reserves the right to respond to matters raised in the presentations of the other parties. If it pleases the Commission and Court session, this concludes the Minister's submission.
Thanks, Mr. Richard. Just a query. In last year's state wage case, the Minister very helpfully provided unpublished data for sales and wages for accommodation and the food services industry up to December 2022, which was very helpful. Do you know whether that sort of information is available this year? Or could inquiries be made?
I could certainly make inquiries. I might... Yes, I'm told it is. So, yes, I believe we can get that information for you. Yes.
If you were able to provide that to us, that would be very helpful indeed.
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jensen. Now, Mr. Hart.
Thanks. May it please the Commission. CCR WA relies primarily on the written submissions that have been tabled and shared with all parties. However, I would take this opportunity to summarise these and our position today. Some of our economic insights referred to in my contribution today, as well as our 2 submissions, are produced in-house. Every quarter we run our business confidence survey. This is the longest running and most comprehensive survey in WA for business confidence. We survey WA businesses of all sizes and sectors across the state on a quarterly basis. We look at business confidence levels, the level of profitability, as well as we explore key concerns facing businesses such as labour costs, supply chain pressures and skill shortages. In the most recent survey for the March quarter, we received 765 respondents. Of those respondents, approximately 20% came from industries most likely represented in the state system, being accommodation, retail and health and social services. Our submission and contribution today draws on some of our March and December quarter results. Chief Commissioner and Commissioners, Western Australia, be they an employer or an employee, have had significant struggles over the past 3 years. While inflation continues to subside, it is still too high in Western Australia and Australia broadly. While the fundamentals of the WA economy are being challenged due to a myriad of local, national and international factors. Significantly, our largest trading partner in China, as both a country and a state, continues to go through some of its weakest economic growth, as shown today by Mr. Christmas. Input prices for business are continuing to rise faster than expected and are elevated in key areas such as construction materials, fuel, wages and service inputs. In particular, with wages growth, there are also concerns around productivity in the workplace. The RBA has raised their concerns in the most recent statement of monetary policy, stating, wages growth appears to have peaked, but is still above the level that can be sustained given trend productivity growth. Commissioners, the rate of businesses going into administration or personal insolvency continues to significantly grow and is of concern to us. In WA, we have seen businesses entering administration now nearly 29% higher over the 12 months to April when compared to the year prior. This includes the 3 industries most likely to be covered in the state industrial relations system, being again retail, accommodation and health and social services.
Mr. Harding, on that point where you helpfully have said how many respondents there were to the business confidence survey recently,
yep,
and you indicated around 20% come from industries likely to be in the state system.
Yes.
Are you able to break down whether those respondents were incorporated or not?
Unfortunately, we don't collect that data, but I can speak to Mr. Collins, but I don't think we do. But we can, if that does change, I can make sure we send that to the Commission.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
So, sorry, I just lost where I was. All right. Personal insolvency rates, where a business is present, are also showing significant increases as well, indicating that the propensity to take on considerable pay increases are being diminished from those businesses likely in the state system. While looking at the rate of business failure, we believe it broadly shows that the overall capacity for businesses to pay continues to be restricted in Western Australia. Just on productivity as well. I'll touch on what we believe the Commission should strongly consider for this state minimum wage case, which is the impact of productivity growth and its relationship to inflation. Productivity growth is important as it enables rising living standards and is needed for real wages growth to be consistent with stable inflation over the medium term. If real wages increase faster than the rate of productivity growth, this puts upward pressure on inflation. Ultimately, increases in wages are not sustainable without long-term gains in productivity growth, a point that continues to be emphasised by the RBA. If labour productivity increases, unit labour costs decline, where unit labour costs are an additional cost of an extra unit of output. Unit labour costs are a critical measure affecting firms' pricing decisions and the overall rate of inflation. Despite improving over the past 6 months, productivity continues to remain weak. Over the year to December 2023, productivity has declined 0.4% back to 2019 levels. Commissioners, while part of the current low productivity growth reflects the impacts of the pandemic, the RBA has noted it is also possible that the structural factors adversely affecting productivity growth in the years prior to the pandemic would persist. In assessing risks to the inflation outlook, the RBA has also identified low levels of productivity growth as one of the key risks of inflation remaining higher for longer. For these reasons, we request the Commission take a more cautious approach when determining its determination, giving ample weight to the state and federal government measures announced to address cost of living pressures for low-income workers. In line with last year's approach, CCIWA has chosen not to specify a particular percentage. Rather, we support an unspecified flat dollar increase. This is in recognition of the difficulty that currently exists in managing inflation and business conditions while providing the greatest support to the lowest paid. Should the Commission choose to accept a percentage increase, we believe that a sustainable increase must be determined, one that is targeted at the low paid and designed to not be inflationary. The alternative could create further inflationary pressure and further place strain on many struggling businesses and employees in WA. This just concludes my introductory remarks. I'll just go into some of these areas in more detail. On the state of the global economy, it has been more resilient than anticipated, considering the number of headwinds and external shocks that have come through the global system. However, there continues to remain significant concerns and uncertainty going forward. As mentioned in my introductory remarks and explained by Mr. Christmas today, China is going through prolonged economic slowdown. The risk of China's outlook is significant as well in relation to reduced domestic consumption, a continued downturn in the property market and structural constraints, including high debt levels, slow productivity and a declining population. Some of the most significant data points here are the total floor space construction, or the number of buildings being built in China, is at its lowest level since late 2005, and residential construction starts have fallen to 26.7% over the year to March. China's economic troubles have a direct impact to WA, as trade with China accounts for over half of our global trade as a state, and importantly, 85% of our WA exports in iron ore, and a quarter of which are used in China's property sector. The weakness is one that can have a significant impact on Western Australia's economy and its employers. I'll also just briefly touch on some geopolitical uncertainty, such as the war in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and uncertainty in the Middle East continues to have a significant impact on global markets. This uncertainty has resulted in higher shipping rates, which are currently at elevated levels following recent attacks in the Red Sea, which in turn flows through the global supply chains. From the geopolitical uncertainty in the Middle East, oil prices have also risen significantly since the start of this year and have seen further price pressures placed on businesses as a result, given its importance as a key input for many businesses. All these factors, if sustained, will see higher input costs through to Western Australian businesses. Chief Commissioner and Commissioners, I'll now touch on the national economy. Australia's national economy has softened over the past year. According to the ABS, the economy has grown just 0.2% over the December quarter, bringing growth to 1.5% over 2023. This is down from 2.4% the year prior, as higher interest rates and sustained inflationary pressures dampen economic activity. As shown by Mr. Christmas today, household consumption has also slowed in a national setting, growing only 0.1% over the December quarter, while discretionary spending falling 0.9% over the same period. The RBA expects this economic activity to remain subdued over 2024 and 2025 as these factors continue to restrain growth. Producer prices, which are measured by the Producer Price Index by the ABS, also continue to remain elevated and are increasing at a rate greater than are being faced by consumers, rising at 4.3% over the year to March. The ABS notes that these stem from labour shortages as well as higher input prices associated with increased importation costs and higher crude oil prices. These factors all continue to push up the cost of doing business in Western Australia. For consumers, inflation continues to subside nationally, which is now at 3.6% over the year to March. However, there continues to remain concerns that it eases slower than expected as services inflation remains stubborn. The RBA has said in its most recent statement of monetary policy have revised upwards inflation to 3.8% nationally by June 24 as a result of higher fuel prices and a slower than expected moderation of services inflation. Much of this is being driven by fast-paced growth in unit labour costs due to weak productivity. Chief Commissioner and Commissioners, as indicated in my introductory remarks, productivity growth is important as it enables rising living standards and is needed for real wages growth to be consistent with stable inflation over the medium term. The impact of this is significant as inflation is regressive, meaning it will impact those on the lowest incomes most and erode whatever benefit comes from large nominal wage increases. Unfortunately, at this time, unit labour costs have risen 6.9% over the year to December 2023, significantly higher than the pre-pandemic average of 1.8%, resulting from higher nominal wages growth and subdued productivity. Productivity growth, which is measured as GDP hours GDP per hours worked remains weak, and despite improving slightly over the past 6 months over the year to December 23, it has again fallen back to 2019 levels. In its May RBA statement, the RBA again raised concerns that wages growth is too high if productivity does not improve. And if productivity growth remains low, it will result in additional inflationary pressures, eroding any large wage increase. Our concerns, encapsulated here and in my introductory remarks, are that if any increase is made to real wages that is out of line with productivity growth, there is a significant risk the wage increase will be eroded through the inflationary pressure it creates. Given this uncertainty, it is imperative in our view that the Commission consider providing significant weight to the impact the rise in the minimum and award rates of pay could have on inflation if productivity growth remains weak over the next year. And I'm just now going to go on to the WA economy and its future outlook.
Sorry,
that's all right.
Mr. Christmas indicated that, when I think you put it to him, that the question of the impact of wage increases depends upon the size of the cohort. And given that last year this Commission increased the state minimum wage by 5.3%, and in the previous year by 5.2%, both of which I might add were real wage increases relative to CPI for those 2 years, neither of those increases appear to have had an impact in upholding inflation, given the rapid decline over the last 12 months.
Yes. So on this, and I go into it a little bit further, but there's also a bunch of factors that obviously go into CPI as well, and I will admit wages growth is not just one of them. It could be the counterfactual in that case, that if the wages growth was lower, however still potentially being a real wages growth, it could have fallen more because there's other factors that were at play. For example, goods prices fell quite sharply over those 2 years. So there is an interplay. And
it's not an easy equation, I know, but simply on the face of it, that's what's occurred.
Yeah.
And on the face of it, it appears to not have had a detrimental impact thus far, at least.
So, and for example, in our submission in reply, we briefly talk about some documents that were in relation to the way costs and Unions WA submission about minimum wage not having an impact on inflation, where the Commonwealth Treasury itself admits that wage prices are continuing to have an impact as the major driver of inflation currently. So,
but is that with a view to wage pricing generally, not minimum wages?
No, not minimum wage, that is true, but minimum wage does contribute to it as well.
Can I just pick up, Mr Harding,
yes,
sorry, before you continue? If, as I understand it, what you're saying is increases to real wages exceeding productivity growth is what has an inflationary effect.
Yes, that is correct.
Have you provided us with information on what the productivity growth rate currently is?
I believe it may be in our initial submission. If it's not, I can provide it to the Commission.
I know you asked Mr Christmas whether it was measured, and I'm just wondering where that lands you.
Yeah.
If increases to real wages are increases exceeding CPI or inflation,
of course,
and then you add on increases to productivity, where does that land you?
No, of
before
course.
it becomes inflationary?
Of course, Commissioner. I don't have the figures right with me at the moment. I know that the ABS as well as the Productivity Commission have measurements in this, and I know as well there's a macroeconomic model by the RBA which I can provide later, which shows those costs, shows that current. And I believe they also have it as part of their chart pack for the statement of monetary policy.
If it's possible to get some of that material, Mr Harding, that would be helpful for us if you're able to.
Absolutely, I can do it within the break.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very
not a problem at all.
Do you mean some analysis around real wage growth being above productivity growth? Do you think it...
Were you just looking for the productivity figures?
I'm asking for productivity growth because I think you add the CPI and the productivity growth to get your what is potentially inflationary.
I believe we have done that as well, and I apologise if it was not in the submission, but I'll make sure we can get that to you during the break.
Thank you very much indeed.
Not a problem at all. So in WA, we have been extremely lucky. The Western Australian economy has continued to perform strongly. This is being driven by solid but slowing household consumption, rising business investment from large-scale investment projects, significant government investment and consumption. WA does continue to have the lowest rate of inflation on the Australian mainland, rising by 3.4% over the year to the most recent CPI data. And just in relation to the comments made by Mr. Entelstein, I apologise for the name being incorrect. We use the CPI data, Intricate, thank you, sorry. We use the headline CPI data because otherwise you will not take into consideration the actual impact of the electricity credits that are occurring through both the state and federal level. And they do still have an impact on what consumers are feeling, because if it means their entire bill disappears, they will ultimately have more money in their pockets. Sorry. As noted,
school of thought that's actually inflationary.
There is that as well. It's a mechanical. It's a mechanical.
That's an economist's
yes.
approach to things.
Yes.
But that's certainly a view that's about the place.
Yes. As noted in the WA government's budget, inflation is also forecast to decline further, falling to 3% in 2024 and 2.5% in 2025. 25-26. Significantly, while we accept there are concerns in individual aspects of non-discretionary spending, such as rents and housing prices, we believe the Commission should continue its position of rejecting cherry-picking of individual statistics from the basket of goods, as CPI continues to be the most reflective indicator for the broader inflationary challenge. Business investment continues to grow, which is encouraging for our economic future. However, it is largely being driven by large-scale projects in the resources sector, such as Woodside, Scarborough and Pluto 2 extensions and Perdaman's urea project. Lastly, government investment also continues to assist the state's economic growth. The state's government's asset investment program has seen a surge in public investment activity, rising 23.9% over the year 2023. Strong growth is expected to continue over the coming years as the project continues to be rolled out. While we have been incredibly lucky, WA's economy continues to be overly reliant on a single industry for our economic prosperity, with the mining sector comprising 46% of the state economy. This is shown in figure 1 of our initial submission, as well as comments made by Mr. Christmas today. This over-reliance on the mining sector means that the WA's economy often follows a boom and bust cycle. When economy demand is strong and prices are high, economic activity typically picks up and vice versa. This is particularly the case for iron ore and LNG, which continue to make up approximately 3/4 of WA's exports. As you can see, our state's robustness is largely due to the significance and strength of our mining industry, with our economic prosperity not always shared across industry sectors. This is why we caution the use of any headline figures in determining whether the businesses can afford a significant rise. For example, the March quarter of the Business Confidence Survey by CCI, we saw that 72 respondents noted that rising costs are a barrier to doing business over the next 12 months. The next highest factor was labour shortages at 6.9%. Both short-term and long-term business confidence has declined substantially from June 2021 and is only marginally improved over the past 12 months for business. Elevated interest rates also continue to weigh heavily on businesses. Just as higher interest rates increase mortgage repayments for households, they too impact the borrowing costs for businesses. Our December 23 Business Confidence Survey found that 11% of WA businesses had turnover that equalled their interest repayments, while a further 4% indicated their interest repayments exceeded their turnover. This means 15% of WA businesses are at risk of closing due to increased borrowing. This is also reflected in the March 24 RBA Financial Stability Review, which stated that the impact of higher interest rates tend to be larger for smaller businesses. These are also the businesses most likely to be captured under the state system. Our March 24 Business Confidence Survey found that 49% of businesses have experienced a decline in profit margins over their quarter, while 36% saw no change. Only 15% of businesses indicated their profits increased. The likely award-reliant industries such as retail trade, food and accommodation, and healthcare and social assistance were industries that saw an even smaller proportion of businesses reporting an increase in their profit margins. These findings also are consistent across Australia. As the RBA noted in the Financial Stability Review, there's an increasing share of firms experiencing challenging conditions. This is particularly the case in discretionary sectors, as households have pulled back on consumption, which has led to significant declines in profitability in the retail and hospitality industries. This survey continues to reinforce what the empirical data mentioned earlier in my submission stated. Businesses in WA and across the country broadly continue to face significant uncertainty and cost pressures. These all continue to result in greater business failures and reduced profitability and ultimately reduced capacity to cover high wage increases. we believe that the Commission should consider the comments of the RBA, recent ASIC and Australian Financial Security Authority data, which was provided in our submission, an initial submission, which show that businesses continue to have restricted capacity to pay. On a system of fair wages and conditions, Commissioners, effective of 1 July 24, statutory superannuation contributions will mandatorily increase 0.5%. There have also been recent changes to location allowance and variations occurring across the state award system by this Commission. We contend that these should be considered as aspects as part of the state wage case, as they will have a direct impact to the cost of employment for businesses in Western Australia. On the wage price index as well. Importantly, based on the wage price index, wages in WA grew by 4.2% over the March quarter compared to a national growth of 4.1%. This is also the third highest rate of growth of all states. And I would also like, while I'm here, to acknowledge a typo that was in our initial submission where we said over the year to 2024-2025.
Which paragraph is this?
I believe it was... I know the Minister's comment in submission in reply mentioned it. We were meant to say to the year to March, but I think we said for the year 23-24.
Well, perhaps you can come back to us on that when you have a moment.
Of course. So, and as you, Chief Commissioner, have just said yourself, state minimum wage has also received a real wage increase so far over the year to March, with a wage increase of 5.3% being greater than the current rate of inflation of 3.4%. However, as the RBA has indicated, inflation has not yet been beaten, and adding to these inflationary pressures will continue the pain of high interest rates and potentially see further softening of the labour market on those who are on the margins. We also note, for a fair system of wages and conditions, businesses must continue to be profitable and of going concern. Currently, profit margins for businesses, in particular small and medium enterprises, are increasingly being tightened and business failures are rising. In relation to meeting the needs of the low paid, the Commission itself in previous cases has stated that the state minimum wage alone cannot address all the needs of the low paid, and as such we believe that the tax and transfer system payments have a significant role in providing targeted relief to the low paid. The state government, as acknowledged by in Mr Christmas's evidence today and the Minister's submission, is providing cost of living relief for many of those who are low paid. The same can be said by the federal government's budget, which is providing approximately $1 billion in cost of living relief to Western Australia. We just did that through a per capita calculation of the population. This is through a varied approach, which includes greater social welfare benefits like rental assistance payments, direct energy relief payments, and other measures. We also have the income tax changes, which are creating real money into people's accounts, which will start on July 1.
There's no question that those cost of living measures are very, very welcome for low income households and low wage earners. The question whether that should moderate an increase in the minimum wage is a more complex one, because the effect of it is to diminish the overall impact on households, low income earners, of the combined effect of a sustained increase in the minimum wage and those cost of living measures. So they work against each other, don't they, in a sense?
I would personally say no, in the instance of we are not suggesting that there should not be an increase at all, nor are we suggesting that that minimum wage earners do not deserve a rise. We simply suggest that these considerations should also be given so that there isn't a large nominal increase in a way to combat inflation, which ultimately will entrench, we believe, inflationary pressures, which will then continue to further erode it. That's the reasoning.
All right, thank you.
We believe these factors should be considered. We contend that a flat dollar increase is the most effective way to deliver the needs of the low paid, as it benefits the lowest paid workers who are disproportionately impacted by the cost of living pressures the most. I would also like to note that I note the Commission's previous concerns regarding maintaining award relativities. We suggest that meeting the needs of the low paid at this point in time has a greater priority in the current inflationary environment, while suggesting that we don't contribute to the inflationary environment. Just on briefly on the Minister's submission, in relation to the number of 3.6, the Minister's submission, in the same way as the Australian federal government, said that they would not like to see minimum wage earners go backwards. at the current rate of inflation at the time that the the Fair Work Commission uses the data, it's currently at 3.6% nationally. As part of making it an equal 0 percentage, that's how we came to a 3.6%
so
calculation.
it's an extrapolation.
Yeah, it's an extrapolation of it. In the same way, we don't contend that the Fair Work Commission will make any of those claims. It was simply to show an example of the claims that are being made by groups that are here today in their national capacity as well, of what could potentially arise. Sorry about that. So, to just sum up our submission, in recognising on the unpredictability of the economic outlook, we encourage the Commission to take a cautious approach in reviewing the state minimum wage and award rates of pay by taking into consideration the dominance of the resources sector in driving the state's economic growth is not reflected within other sectors of the economy. Businesses are facing significant challenges in WA, driven by labour shortages and the rising cost of doing business, which has ameliorated business profits and created many business failures. The rising level of insolvencies and administration among businesses most likely to be represented in the WA state industrial relations system, the concern of productivity in the workplaces remaining to lag below the long-run average, which further risks inflationary pressures when there is significant wage growth without equal productivity increases, as well as the increase in superannuation and other award payment changes. And as well as the federal, state and government cost of living measures announced in the 24-25 budget. For these reasons, we suggest the flat dollar increase will be most appropriate, and that concludes my remarks today.
Thank you very much indeed.
Just, sorry.
Yes.
We were talking about productivity.
Yes.
The CCI's written submissions paragraph 16 refers to productivity declining 0.4%
Yes.
over the year to December 2023, and it references the footnote 11,
Yes.
the RBA statement, Monetary Policy Decision, March 2024. I don't think that statement, when I looked at it, contained any information about productivity declines. But if that can be clarified,
absolutely,
or the source of that
I
figure.
can absolutely clarify that. It may have been in the full statement and not the media release. That may have
That might be right.
That may have been an accident on my end, and I apologise.
Thank you. Are we still going to hear from Dr. Wesley today or not?
She's in the second session in the reply.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much indeed for those submissions. Now,
Chief Commissioner, Senior Commissioner, Commissioners. We rely primarily on our written submissions, including submissions, supplement them with these oral submissions.
yes,
Our response submissions support the alignment of the minimum wage with the General Award, and Mr. James will speak at this point broadly. Unions WA continues to support the position that each award rate should be increased by 7.359%, this being based on the analysis found in our primary submissions, and Mr. Hanson will then speak to that point, Chief Commissioner.
yes.
This would result in a minimum wage of 9.48 cents per week, or $24.96 per hour. It amounts to a 9.83% increase.
Sorry, it's a very precise figure. I think this has been mentioned elsewhere. Is this simply taking the adjustment to the C14-13 rate and a further amount of 5%? Is that where that figure comes from, just for our assistance?
Yes, and Mr. Hanson will speak into a little bit more detail, but
we're correct in that
very
assumption?
bluntly, yes, that is the assumption.
Thank you.
Correct. The submissions written and oral, Chief Commissioner, that we make today on behalf of the lowest paid workers in the state support two broad propositions. The first one being that we're collectively living through a period of significant and sustained increases in living costs, which we say disproportionately affects low-paid workers. And secondly, we say that WA workers, those reliant on the state minimum wage, are paid less than an equivalent federal system employee. And there's the real risk of that creating a low wage zone within Australia's employment landscape. Our slightly unorthodox approach today in making submissions, and we appreciate your indulgence on that, has been a result from a Unions WA perspective of somewhat unprecedented interest by affiliate unions in this matter. The message that's reaching every union office across Perth and WA more broadly is that union members are struggling. They're struggling with the compounding impact that cost of living is having upon them. The message that's reaching union offices is that savings are being eaten into and wages are not keeping pace with rising costs. If this message is hitting all union offices and this is impacting on all workers, it would appear to us uncontroversial that the lowest paid will be the hardest hit. In addition to the foreshadowed speakers, Chief Commissioner, I'll also have Mr. Sumner speak to the proposed changes to Principle 7.
Yes.
Given the bench's previous remarks, it would seem appropriate that we'll start with Mr. James, who'll talk to alignment of C13, C14.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. James.
May it please the Commission in court. At the outset, I would say Unions WA relies on the written submissions previously filed as well as the responsive submissions. We'd also commend the submissions of the Minister and the oral submissions today of Mr. Intrican to the Commission. And broadly note that no other Section 50 party or intervener today has advanced a definite position on how to deal with C14 rates other than Unions WA and the Minister. We'd say broadly, if the Commission in court is of the view that they wish to adopt a position similar to that of the Fair Work Commission, which is C14 reflects a transitional rate and the full-time adult minimum should be reflected by C13, there are two likely or possible alternatives that the Commission could adopt. The first is broadly that of the Minister, where C13 is adopted as the adult minimum rate under Section 12 of the MCE Act, with the addition of any state minimum wage increase that's decided upon in these proceedings. We largely support that proposal, but we're also advanced in our submissions an alternative position, which was, I would say, broadly more similar to that of the Fair Work Commission, where the C14 remains a transitional rate in awards, but would require, as noted in the submissions in reply by the Minister, broader legislative change, I would think, to allow the Commission to undertake that kind of transitional role, particularly given, as noted by the Commission, that Section 12 of the MCE provides for an adult minimum wage and doesn't allow, I would say, for transitional rates other than rates for apprentices, people with disabilities and junior rates. I would note the concerns raised in the questioning of Mr. Intrican today around the condensation relativities, and would submit that they're only tangentially related to the mandatory considerations within Section 50A sub 3 of the IR Act, and would submit that the position the Commission in Court ought to arrive at is similar to that of FWC, in that the primary consideration in my mind in transitioning from C14 rates to a C13 rate as the national minimum wage was that the C14 rate was never properly considered and determined as to whether or not it met the needs of the low paid, which I would note is a mandatory consideration for this Commission under Section 50A sub 3. On that basis, I would say the condensation relativities, particularly the flattening of C14 to a single C13 rate across awards, is not inconsistent with the obligations within Section 50A and the considerations for this commission. On that basis, I'd commend, again, the submissions of the Minister in that regard, particularly given, as noted in the Minister's reply, the potential expense, time and effort that would be required to review all awards and potentially modify classifications, as well as the legislative changes required to implement a system of transitional C14 rates across the state award system.
Yes, I mean, the Fair Work Commission has been looking at this for some time. In fact, over nearly 2 years. So it's not an easy process to tackle award by award, for example, and particularly given in the state system where there are only a group of awards that are probably responsible for or cover most or many in the state system. So there are different considerations, but we have to try and address the issue in some way. One way might be Section 40B of the Act in terms of dealing with awards that might contain rates less than the state minimum wage, for example, which has been done before. Another way might be a Section 50 general order to deal with the same question, which has been done previously as well. But the issue does present some challenges.
We would submit the flattening to C13 as probably the simplest solution, Chief Commissioner. And on that basis is preferred. In terms of the witness statement we also filed on behalf of Ms Sarah Whittaker, we've canvassed the other parties today and are of the understanding that no other party intends to cross-examine Ms Whittaker and would either swear Ms Whittaker in so the statement can be tendered, unless the Commission would like to take that statement as read.
We'll just check whether we have any questions. Any questions? It's a witness statement rather than a sworn statement.
It can be affirmed if it pleases the Commission.
All right. Is Ms Whittaker here?
She is.
All right. Well, perhaps at a convenient time. I know some submission. There are actually two statements. There's a supplementary statement as well,
yes.
Which has put an alternative view, it seems.
I think the statement of Ms Whittaker is primarily directed at this idea that there is a disparity between state and federal systems, particularly in sectors which the United Workers Union covers, that are primarily reliant on funding from federal governments, and that funding is largely pegged towards federal awards. As mentioned in our initial submissions, as well as the submissions in the state, there is an increasing disparity due to the fact that our national wage increases have been delivered on a percentage basis. So over time, there's an emerging discrepancy in these sectors where funding is being delivered on the basis of far higher minimum rates of pay, which essentially allow employers within the state sector to extract a profit or rent, I would say, that's otherwise unearned.
All right. We'll take the statements as they are without the need to have Ms Whittaker attend in the box. There's two. There's the first statement filed on 15 May. That will be Exhibit Unions WA1. And the second, which was filed on 20 May, will be Unions WA2. Yes, thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr. James. Mr. Stephen?
Chief Commissioner, Mr Hanson will make some remarks around the financial aspects of our
Very well,
submissions.
thank you. Mr Hanson, please.
May it please the Commission Court. Western Australian households are experiencing significant and sustained price increases, eroding the purchasing power of their wages. Despite the overall strength of the Western Australian economy, this strength conceals the underlying challenges facing workers and households who are in the midst of a cost of living crisis. This crisis has been particularly acute for those on lower wages because of the extent of increases in the prices of essentials. Rental price increases remain a pronounced pressure on low-paid workers, with the Perth rents CPI increasing in the March 2024 quarter on an annual basis of 9.9% and from the previous quarter by 2.9%. This is the highest annual increase in 15 years. The particular relevance of escalating rental prices in regards to meeting the needs of the low paid and the living standards of employees is apparent when considering the consumption patterns of the lowest two income quintiles. The ABS National Accounts data demonstrates that the lowest two income quintiles rent consumes the greatest share of their income, followed by food. As a result, historically large increases to rents can have the impact of crowding out expenditure on other consumption categories, as there's simply less income left to cover those costs. Domain's March quarter rental report makes clear the scale of rental costs increases burdening households in Western Australia. Rental costs for houses and units in Perth increased for a 10th consecutive quarter, with the steepest annual increase of all capital cities. Median house rents increased by a staggering 18.2% over the past year, with median unit rents seeing even greater increases of 22.2%. These increases place asking rents in Perth at a record high, according to Domain's dataset, which extends back 2 decades. The Real Estate Institute of WA is forecasting that this year will see a further 20% increase in rents. Perth's sustained record low rental vacancy rate indicates there is no short-term path to lower rental costs. As such, we see wage increases essential for workers to be able to secure housing. The cost of living pressure on water-reliant workers are even more acute than what is reflected in CPI, as employees, and particularly lower income ones, spend a larger proportion of their income on non-discretionary items, as noted earlier. This is reflected in the ABS Selected Living Costs Index, which measures the changes over time of the after-tax income of households. This index has seen quarterly increases in living costs for employee households whose primary source of income is wages and salaries continually outstrip CPI increases since September 2022. The March quarter 2024 figures revealed that Australian employee households had the largest annual rise in living costs of all household types at 6.5% from the previous year. These increases have a serious and detrimental impact on the living standards of workers. Recent data from the ABS has revealed that the amount of food and beverages sold in Australia decreased by an approximate 1.9% in 22-23, despite population growth. All major food groups were found to have been consumed less, with the consumption of vegetables and legumes decreasing by 6.8% and fruit by 6.1%. The ABS notes that the recent price increases in food, along with a general increase in all consumer prices, is consistent with a lower volume of food being purchased, despite the value of food retail turnover in 22-23 exceeding previous years. These statistics reveal the material impact that financial pressures, the lack of real wage growth for minimum award wage workers have on the ability of households to afford the essential foods they require to be healthy. Unions WA notes that though there were a number of announcements made in the state and federal budgets relating to cost of living relief, they do not in any way reduce the need for real and meaningful wage increases. To directly discount or moderate wage increases on the basis of these measures would be to negate government action that is intended to benefit low-paid households. Further, many of these announcements don't provide a blanket benefit to all low-paid workers due to varying eligibility requirements and tests, let alone the scale of the cost pressures they face, as discussed in more detail in our submission in reply. On the matter of how a precise figure that we have advanced in our submission was reached, the Chief Commissioner is correct that it reflects a closing of the gap between the state and federal levels, and then a further 5%. We consider that, based on the pressures facing households, that this is an appropriate and sustainable amount. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for those submissions, Mr. Hanson.
Chief Commissioner, we'll now have Mr. Sumner who will speak to Principle 7, the proposed changes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Sumner?
Thank you. If it pleases the Commission in Court session, I'd like to walk you through our submissions for Principle 7. To explain some of the changes to the proposed principle when compared to the current principle, we thought was a good place to start. The proposed changes remove the dated wording such as to refer to a strict test and broadens considerations of work value in line with the more modern approach taken in section 157 2A of the Fair Work Act to include considerations being the nature of the work, the level of skill or responsibility involved in doing the work and the condition in which the work is done. And it's noted that these considerations have been in effect in the Fair Work system since 2018 with no significant issues. The proposed change also removes unnecessary restrictions such as that with leapfrogging, and I submit that the Commission already has appropriate mechanisms in place to guard against overclassification, such as those contained in Principle 7.11, which aren't proposed to change. I'm pleased to advise after the State Wage Case decision in 2023, Unions WA has conferred with the parties and workshopped the principles that were presented in its previous submissions last year. Some subtle changes have been made from the previous year's submissions, such as requiring the changes to the nature of work be significant and justified. You'll see this reflected in parts 7.1 and 7.3 of the submissions, and also removing references to the word test. In relation to the CCIWA's proposed additional wording to the submission, I'd like to thank the Minister for their submissions and reply and agreement to the proposal, and I support the Minister's response that work value should be equal across industries and that the effect on the employer should not be considered when visiting work value. Further, I caution against including the impacts of the employer in the assessment of work value, as this could cause applications for work value increases that are fuelled by employer profit margins over the value of the work that's performed. To conclude, I submit that failing to change the work value principles in line with the modern standard may result in state system employers being disadvantaged when compared to the Fair Work system, and Unions WA relies on their submissions in the first and submissions in reply on this matter.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. Mr. Snedden.
Chief Commissioner, we shall be done by 1 o'clock.
Well,
by the looks.
Let us not hold you up, as I say.
We really just have Mr. Brinkman who'll make some closing submissions, but as I have the standard, I just want to add one additional point that was made by Mr. Hanson. When I was looking through this last night, I wanted to put some context in my mind as to what this meant. And I used housing because I think we understand how critical that is. I looked at the rentals that were available in the Greater Perth area. There's 2,000 there or thereabouts. And I looked at what was available if a worker getting paid the minimum wage that we propose with the increase, the alignment of C1314 and the increase on top. I looked at what was available for that worker if they paid half of that salary. They paid half of that salary. And in Greater Perth at the moment, there's less than 80 properties available for that worker. And a roof's a roof, but looking at some of those properties, they're not living in luxury in those properties either. That, to me, just contextualised what we're talking about here, and it contextualised some of the pressure that's been put on the workers that we're speaking on behalf of today, and that the Commission is going to make some decisions that will have a serious impact on. Thank you for that indulgence. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Brinkman to make some closing submissions, and then, as far as Unions WA is concerned, Chief Commissioner, that will be our submissions.
All right, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Brinkman.
Thank you, Chief Commissioner. Unions WA submits in closing for an increase of 7.359% to award wages and supports the realignment to the state minimum wage to the C13 rate, with the full increase applied to apprentices and juniors on the basis of economic analysis, consideration of cost of living pressures, and the need for a fair wages system, whilst balancing the Commission's statutory considerations. Realignment to the C13 rate addresses the disparity and exacerbating inequality between the West Australian and national system of wages by providing a substantial real wage increase. Unions WA contends that the realignment will result in improving wage outcomes for low-paid workers, narrowing the aggregate gender pay gap, and the growing pay gap between casual workers in the industrial relations system for WA. Despite increases to the state minimum wage and award wages, real wage increases have gone backwards. Positive growth forecasts position the West Australian and the Australian economy to make substantial increases to compensate for the rising cost of living to award-free and award-reliant workers. Unions WA proposes changes to the work value principle will harmonise the federal test and ensure that workers receive equal remuneration, especially in women-dominated industries, by eliminating existing significant barriers in accessing work value claims. Finally, Unions WA contends that cost of living measures are not a substitute for an increase in wages and contradicts the benefits to low-paid households. With that, as it pleases the Commission, that concludes Unions WA's submissions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brennan. Well, that's impeccable timing, 5 minutes to 1. What we'll do now is adjourn and we'll resume at 2:15 this afternoon. Thank you very much.